Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Inside Today's Boardrooms. I'm Eric Shore from Diligent Institute, and today we're thrilled to be joined by Wendy Webb, who serves as an independent director at Wynn Resorts, ABM Industries, American Homes, and AppFolio. Wendy's career in the C-suite included roles overseeing investor relations and corporate communications at Disney and Ticketmaster. Wendy, thanks for joining us on the show.
Hi, Eric. Happy to be here.
Thanks. And today we want to dig into some issues related to investor relations. And in particular, curious to get your take on what information an investor relations team should be providing to the board of directors.
Well, just to step back to the big picture, of course, the board of directors has several duties, one of which is to oversee management, particularly the CEO. But secondarily, it is to make decisions in the best long-term interests of shareholders, all shareholders. So investor relations information is pretty key to a director being able to fulfill that fiduciary responsibility. As far as information on investor relations, all directors should be provided with some frequency a list of the top shareholders and their investment style. They should have a general understanding of shareholder sentiment, which can be provided by the head of investor relations or the CFO. The board also should have access to analyst research. A couple of my boards, the companies post those reports on Diligent for access by board members at any time. It's particularly helpful for the CFO or head of investor relations to summarize in 3 to 5 key points following earnings, how the earnings were received. So that's an expectation from the directors. And also just understanding what upcoming earnings reports there are, conferences, non-deal roadshows the company is going to be spending time with.
That's terrific. And you mentioned sentiment, which is such an important topic. As a board member, are there specific questions that you try to ask to make sure that you have an understanding of the company's relationship with its shareholders?
I do think directors are wise to go ahead and double click it with questions in board meetings to get a little deeper understanding of investor sentiment, the company's strengths and weaknesses, such as perceived by the Wall Street folks. They should. This is critical. The next point is critical to shareholder value creation, which is to question the company's point of view on allocation of capital, whether the company is using any of its free cash flow to fund organic growth, M&A, dividend, share repurchase, and that's the way to continue to try to unlock value for shareholders. I think another question can be the degree that ESG matters to the institutional investors. There seems to be kind of a evolution of how much or how little that matters going forward, and understanding where we are in that curve. By what metrics the street measures the company is another set of questions for directors. How are our investors looking at our company? What metrics do they use? And then perhaps from time to time, some update on the competitive lens for the company.
And building on that last point, a lot of what we've talked about so far is looking inward at the company. But a lot of what's important to investors is comparing your company against peers. As a board member, what do you look at to benchmark performance against peers? And what else might directors look for in this area to gain a level of comfort?
Yeah, I think companies can always do much more in this area. The board, swoops in only 4 or 5 times a year, and therefore are not immersed in the industry day to day as the management is. So it's important to continue to update the directors on what the competitive set is doing. It's really important to understand their general strategies and how that's differentiated from the company on whose board you serve strategy. What metrics the other companies in your peer set are valued by what the valuation multiples look like for others, understanding why some are more valuable than others, including your own company. I've seen a wide spectrum of competitive or information or lack thereof from different companies, anywhere from really nothing provided to all the way to a very dense financial summary of each of the company's financial performance. But definitely an important thing, and I would say from the boardroom to give us more.
And as a tactical follow up, you mentioned you may hear from the investor relations officer or you may hear from the CFO. But what advice, when you join a board, do you have for the management team about who should be presenting this investor information to the board, and why do you have your preferences there?
Well, it really depends, I guess, on the level of sophistication of the investor relations. There's a wide range of investor relations professionals out there, and there are very, very sophisticated investor relations folks. I'd love to hear personally straight from the investor relations individual, and I do find that on my 4 boards, I get exposure to those folks. Which is terrific. A lot of times CFOs want to take the lead in that area, and that's okay too. But if there's an opportunity to showcase the next level down, the head of investor relations, I think that's terrific.
Another hot topic related to investors is shareholder activism. And the common refrain now is that boards should think like an activist or be their own activist. What kinds of things do you do to understand activist vulnerabilities?
Proactive outbound communications. Sometimes we've had presentations from various investment banking firms on the state of the activism landscape. So that's very helpful to continue to understand what's happening around a company, even if it's not under attack. I always would advise that any investor inquiry, particularly some firm that might turn into an activist, be responded to very quickly and perhaps even proactively with communications, and be open and not in return hostile unnecessarily. I think it's best to listen at first and develop respectful and smart responses to activist or potential activist inquiries. To think like an activist is important for a board. The board has to be very unemotional about a number of things in their review of the business, consistently looking at business units and their success or lack thereof. Be very unemotional about thinking about a potential spinoff or potential shutdown of a division, since that tends to be one of the first ways an activist can enter into an activism campaign. And then it's probably important too to think about the lessons learned by doing a look back or postmortem on any M&A the company has done, or any other deals, joint ventures, other things, to see did these actions achieve expectation? Why not? And it helps inform the company going forward to get better and better at M&A and building value with other deals and allocation of capital decisions. What were the lessons learned? So all those things help you prepare for speaking with an activist, unless their approach is trivial, and then there's sort of a different way to approach it. But if it's substantive, those are probably the ways to approach it.
Finally, Wendy, one of the biggest trends of the last decade has been direct communication between board members and shareholders. I wanted to get your take on how, as a director, to prepare for direct engagement with shareholders, and what in particular about that can be challenging.
Well, first, I think the board has to decide if they're going to have a board member or a couple of them interact with shareholders, who are the best spokespersons for the board, who have the most authority in the area. If it's comp related, maybe it's head of the compensation committee. If it's something more strategic, perhaps it's the chairman of the board or the lead director. If it's somebody who is used to speaking with outside parties, for example, when Disney was under activism attack in the early 2000s, George Mitchell, who was a leader in the Senate, was chosen because of his ability to negotiate with counterparties and speak well on behalf of the company. So designating a person to be the lead from the board is very important. That person in preparation needs probably 3 simple strategic messages that they can return to over and over again. That's par for the course for any PR or IR effort, that there is very clear messaging that can get repeated over and over again, and in response to questions, getting back to those 3 simple, memorable points. There should be a lot of Q&A prep if they're, from the investor relations executive who can prep on, here are some of the potential questions, and here are the Reg FD ways to reply to those, and the smart way to reply to those. I think it helps if there is an understanding of the mind and motivation of the activist, and that the best way to get to that is by listening really carefully to what they seem to be putting forward, and then thinking about the underlying motivation. Sometimes activists use activism as a way to fundraise. So it may actually not have much to do with what they really think should go on with your company, but just a way to prove to potential limited partners that they ought to invest because this firm is quite active. So if that's the case, it's a slightly different sort of response than if it's truly a financial engineering or some other kind of action that they're wishing to be taken. Listening is important, but then another tactic is to consider giving the activist a win. It doesn't have to be scorched earth on both sides. It can be the company being smart, and if the activist is asking for something simple for the company to do, perhaps you let them, you give them the win and let them claim victory on the simple thing you gave them. And then lastly, I would just say preparing to engage with shareholders. It's a lot about tone, and a tone of deep respect, because the shareholders are perhaps the most important constituency amongst many others, including other stakeholders like employees and governments and media, et cetera. But shareholders have a primacy and deserve respect.
Wendy, this has been terrific. Really appreciate the advice and wisdom that you've shared with our viewers today. We're out of time for now, but thank you for joining us. We appreciate you taking the time. To everyone, we will see you with another topic next week.